Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Canada puts its support behind a UN call for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. We'll talk about the impact of that resolution. On the open line, one of the biggest issues of 2023 in BC has been public safety, from retailers' concerns about rising violence to advocates' calls for addressing root causes. Has your perception of safety in the public changed this year? That's on the open line. Plus, actor Andre Braugher has died at 61. We'll talk about his formidable career and how he made Captain Holt everyone's favorite character on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Welcome to BC Today. Thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1, live streaming as well on the CBC News app, CBC Gem, and cbc.ca/BC. I'm Michelle Eliot. And yes, Canada has supported the UN's non-binding resolution calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau released a joint statement with the Prime Ministers of New Zealand and Australia supporting the resolution. And the resolution passed the UN General Assembly with 153 votes in favor, 10 against, and 23 abstentions. The vote followed a decision from the United States Friday to veto a resolution at the UN Security Council calling for, quote, an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. For more on this, we have reached Michael Link. He's a professor emeritus at Western Law. He's also served as the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory. Hello, good afternoon.
Thank you for having me, Michelle.
Thank you for joining us. This is a non-binding resolution. What does Canada's vote actually mean?
Well, Canada joined with a number of other middle powers in voting in favor of the ceasefire resolution. In October, Canada had abstained on a weaker resolution that was passed by the General Assembly by a vote of around 120 nations in favor of this. You're right, this is non-binding, but it also is a fairly accurate barometer of what international public opinion and international diplomatic opinion is saying. So I think what the clear message is to the United States, which has been diplomatically shielding Israel and supplying it with its military ammunition during the course of the war on Gaza, that the ability of Israel to continue this war in defiance of diplomatic and public opinion is probably waning and waning quickly. And I suspect there's probably some hard conversations going on now between the United States and Israel with respect to how soon Israel's operations must end.
It hasn't had an impact yet. How soon might it actually influence any kind of decision?
Well, commentary I've seen yesterday and today suggests that the U.S. might be telling Israel that it has to end by the end of the month, by the end of December. If that is what the U.S. is actually saying to Israel, I guess what I and many people would fear is that Israel would step up the scale of its fight, of its assault, looking for Hamas fighters and Hamas military leaders, which would leave, obviously, the almost 2 million people huddling in the southern end of the Gaza Strip even more vulnerable to being collateral damage in this war.
How significant is it that Canada did vote for this resolution? You said that it abstained last time around. This is a shift from its long-standing practice of voting with Israel on major UN resolutions. What changes here?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. The annual basket of resolutions with respect to the Israeli occupation of Palestine are being voted on either later on this week or during next week. You're right, Canada has, for the past 20 years, since the Paul Martin government, been largely voting against these resolutions in favor of, I guess, an Israeli position. Even though many of these resolutions stand in favor or are consistent with what Canada's stated policy is, i.e. a two-state solution. The Israeli settlements are illegal under international law. Annexation of occupied territory is illegal under international law. These resolutions all state what the existing international legal position is. Canada votes against them, yet it has a stated policy on its Foreign Affairs website, which says we're in favor of what the thrust of these resolutions are. If I was a betting man, I would say I'm not expecting Canada to change its voting position very much in the votes that are upcoming in the next week.
And what are those votes then? How significant are they?
Well, they're fairly significant. The voting majority is pretty large in favor of these resolutions. Somewhere between 120 and 140 nations will be voting in favor of these basket of resolutions with respect to the funding for the Palestinian, the UN agency that looks after Palestinian refugees, on the settlements, on annexation, on Palestinian right to self-determination. All of these resolutions, as I said, are in the mainstream of international law regarding Israel and Palestine. And yet Canada, except for the resolution on Palestinian self-determination, generally either abstains or votes against.
What does this say about Canada's policy towards Israel and in this war as well? You know, we've heard the Prime Minister say Israel has a right to defend itself. What does it say about Canada's policy on that front then?
Well, it means that Canada is generally behind international public opinion, even international regional diplomatic opinion, such as in Europe. Canada would be a laggard with respect to this. And a lot of the votes, we are among somewhere between 8 to 10 nations who are voting against these resolutions. And political scientists have pointed out that Canada's laggard position with respect to the Israeli occupation of Palestine has likely been a contributing reason as to why Canada lost its bid for a Security Council seat in 2010 under Stephen Harper, and again in 2020 under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So I don't think people look to us with respect to leadership or diplomatic courage when it comes to the Middle East and looking at Canada's voting record at the General Assembly.
I know you speak a lot about geopolitics, but what will this mean for the federal Liberal government domestically? We heard in the newscast there, you know, some MPs, Liberal MPs speaking out against Anthony Housefather was quoted there. What will this mean for the Trudeau government domestically in Canada?
Well, you have to remember, Canada's blessed to have a number of large diaspora communities, new Canadians living in Canada who've come here over the course of the last 60 years. A number of them coming from the global South, a number of them having feelings, or particularly strong feelings, with respect to Israel and Palestine. And we can see that reflected in a number of Liberal MPs. Who were very uncomfortable with Canada's position and who pushed for Canada back in October in early November to support a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. So you have a split opinion in the Liberal caucus. You have a split opinion in probably the broader Liberal Party, and Justin Trudeau, I'm sure, is trying to manage this, but not with always great success.
What do you see in the weeks to come?
Well, let's hope that there is a ceasefire. I know that there's a great deal of pressure on the United States. It recognizes which way the wind is blowing publicly and diplomatically. There was a smart comment made by the Secretary of Defense for the U.S., Lloyd Austin, who said, in this kind of fight, the center of gravity is the civilian population. And if you drive the civilian population into the arms of the enemy, and he's talking to Israel, then you may achieve a tactical victory, but you're going to suffer a strategic defeat. And I'm sure that's what the United States is trying to convey these days to Israel with regards to this. Afterwards, this is one of the biggest, if you like, humanitarian catastrophes we had in recent years. When Israel assaulted Gaza in 2014, there were roughly 2,300 dead by the end of that, and it cost about $5 billion for the world to pour into Gaza to try to reconstruct it. We're talking about a level of destruction of the living space in Gaza much, much higher than in 2014. We're probably looking at somewhere between 20 and $40 billion that's going to be needed to be able to reconstruct Gaza. And meanwhile, you have a winter descending upon Gaza. We have no end game in the sense of who's going to take over the administration of Gaza and the reconstruction of Gaza. It's likely going to be the United Nations. But there are many demands for money in many parts of the world. So it's going to be a bleak future with respect to Gaza. I think we're further away than ever than trying to find a two-state solution, which is the diplomatic common talking piece with respect to Israel and Palestine. So I think things are going to get worse before they ever have a chance of getting better.
Michael, I appreciate your perspective on this today. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me, Michelle.
Michael Link is a professor emeritus at Western Law. He's also served as the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory. It's 12:16 now, 1:16 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Eliot. There has been a historic breakthrough at Dubai at COP28, and one that is sending a strong signal the world will move toward a greener future. Negotiators worked through the night on the deal, and for the first time ever, it calls for a transition away from fossil fuels. There was a standing ovation as COP President Sultan Al Jaber of the United Arab Emirates approved the deal, and the final agreement contains stronger language than previous proposals, but it stops short of calling for the phasing out or phasing down of fossil fuels. And critics have said the new deal contains loopholes that allows countries to continue using fossil fuels. Negotiators in Dubai are hailing the deal as a major step forward, though. Tom Green is a senior climate policy advisor at the David Suzuki Foundation and says this deal does send a signal there is an end date and that will have implications for present and future investments in fossil fuel.
I see this as flawed but still transformative because for the first time, we are naming oil and gas as the culprit. We're being very clear that if we're going to have a climate safe future, which is what we all need, we need to get fossil fuels out of our economy. We need to stop expanding any production facilities, like we shouldn't be building any LNG terminals in Canada. And we need to be pivoting the economy to use clean energy. And so that goes nicely with the call to triple renewables. And so I think it's a real agenda for action over the next 7 years to 2030 and then beyond.
That was Tom Green, the senior climate policy advisor at the David Suzuki Foundation, talking about the historic deal reached at COP28. This is BC Today here on CBC One Radio 1 in Metro Vancouver at 88.1 FM and live streaming online as well. You can catch us on the CBC News app, on YouTube at CBC Vancouver, and on our website, cbc.ca/BC. Well, one of the biggest issues and debates in BC this year has been the issues of crime and public safety. Now, some local mayors have cited a rise in crime. Provincial politicians have debated the criminal justice system and how it approaches repeat offenders. Advocates have urged more measures to tackle issues like homelessness and mental health. Meanwhile, a poll early this year found British Columbians felt worse about public safety. But looking at the reality of that, there was a disparity around whether crime and public safety have been bigger concerns. Well, we'll hear more about that poll after 12:30. I'd also like to hear from you over this next half hour. Has your perception of public safety in your community changed this year? And what is that based on? What, if anything, needs to change about how we deal with those complex issues around crime? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, in October, a new group of retailers and trade organizations calling itself the Save Our Streets Coalition came together to speak out about a rise in theft, vandalism, and violent crime at their businesses. Ian Tostenson is president and CEO of the BC Restaurant and Food Services Association, and that's one of the 33 founding members of Save Our Streets. Ian joins me now. Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, Michelle. How are you today?
I am fine. Thank you for joining us, Ian.
Great.
Looking back a few weeks ago, you held a news conference, or Save Our Streets held a news conference on October 30th to announce that it had come together and to speak out on these issues. What are the concerns?
Well, I think yesterday's news was sort of illustrates this. This is Finch's little coffee shop and sandwich shop in Vancouver, and they've been vandalized something in the order of 6 or 7 or 8 times in the last 2 years, to a total cost of about $16,000. It's basically been window breakage. And they're an example of what's happening in all communities throughout British Columbia, where it's a real problem. There's a small restaurant group that on the island in Duncan, and they had just restored one of their bathrooms, and the next day it was destroyed. And the restaurant next door, they repainted it, and the next day it was destroyed. So it's a real problem. If you look at London Drugs, they've said that their store in downtown Vancouver, they're spending about $1.5 million a year on security just to protect their staff. So the SOS Coalition was formed with interested parties throughout British Columbia to raise these concerns to government and to ask government because they have the tools and the connections and the finances to see what we can do to work together to try to tame this a bit.
How does this time or this year compare to previous years? When those incidents you talk about, are they becoming more frequent?
They are, and it's certainly sort of post-pandemic. There's more activity. There's more people back on the streets in downtown Vancouver. We saw. I mean, Vancouver's a good example, but we saw it in Victoria. We're seeing in Prince George and Kelowna, where there's been where we've had the sort of unfortunate parts of the city have sort of expanded, if you will, their presence into other parts of the city, and that's really seems to be the result of the pandemic, anecdotally, of course. And it's with compassion that we are approaching this. This is not let's get them and throw them off the streets. This is like we got to find a solution here that protects our businesses and protects people wanting to invest and come, and our tourism industry all throughout British Columbia, but also is respectful and mindful of the situation that we have with people that are living on the streets. And what we do see though is that, and we see this in many U.S. cities. The majority of crime that's being committed is usually by a small percentage of the people. So it's not like we can cast a net over everybody and say anybody's living on the street in downtown East Side in Vancouver is causing a problem. It's a very small percentage, and they're repeat offenders. And I think one of the issues that the Premier has been working at for British Columbia is the court system and see what we can do to help the situation.
You talk about anecdotal, the Vancouver Police Department, their stats say that property crime, which includes theft, went up between 2021 and 2022. No stats available yet for 2023. Beyond anecdotes, to what extent are these incidents actually on the rise?
Well, I think the more we sort of talk about it, and when the SOS Coalition came together, I think we were all quite surprised at how many people actually had a place now to sort of discuss their situation and their stories. Before that, it was just sort of, we just heard about it. So now it's a bit more centered, and we're able to sort of collect the stories and pass them to government. But I certainly don't see anything that's reducing, Michelle. I think that 2023 is going to be as bad, if not worse, than the years previous. And and that's the concern. And you have the provincial government has offered a grant to help businesses with some of the cost, which will help. I think it's a couple $1,000 or something, which is really nothing compared to the, as I said, Finch's restaurant. They've spent $16,000, and this is on top of, for businesses, Michelle, of all the other costs that they've incurred. They're carrying debt, they're carrying all these other burdens with their business. This is just a necessary cost to them because eventually their insurance will not want to reinsure these businesses, or their insurance rates will go up that it becomes even more unaffordable to operate. So we just got to keep the pressure on to see what we can do to solve this.
I wonder about the discrepancy between the perception and reality when it comes to crime. We're going to speak with the pollster Mario Canseco with Research Co., who found early this year that people felt that criminal activity in their community had increased, and that had gotten worse. But when it came to whether people actually had become victims, that had stayed the same. Is it that perhaps the business community is feeling this more acutely than the general public? What do you think is how do you explain that difference?
I think if I understand what you're saying, Michelle, you're right, because the trail of destruction is there. I mean, you see the broken window, you see the vandalism, you see it. when it comes to personal crime, we don't necessarily see it. When it comes to, crime in people's homes, breaking, entering, we don't quite see it as visibly as we do in businesses. You see a business, you see it boarded up, you see the destruction that's happening, and you see it all over the place. So I think it is. I think you're absolutely right about that. And the fact that we have the SOS Coalition is probably going to raise it even more with more visibility. As I said, the people I met during the SOS Coalition launch, all through, even from the Kootenays, and the stories that we hear from business owners, and it's not like, one or two, just about every single person you talk to that has got a business in the areas in British Columbia that they're most affected by this has got a story about something, either shoplifting or vandalism or something has happened. So it's a real problem, and it's not just Vancouver. If you go to Seattle, New York City, San Francisco, is classic for the problems that they're having right now with street crime.
Let's take a call here quickly from Randy in Vancouver. We're asking you, has your perception of public safety in your community changed in 2023? What are you basing that on? And what do you think needs to change when it comes to our approach to those complex issues that intertwine with crime and public safety? Our numbers, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Randy is on the phone from Vancouver. Hi, Randy.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Just very briefly, and it's a long, long topic. We can't have public safety until we have true public health. And we're talking about the streets and vulnerable populations, many who are mentally ill, many who are severely addicted, and many who are both severely addicted and mentally ill. I think it's time that all levels of government start discussing building and staffing properly funded, secure mental health facilities.
What do you mean by secure mental health facilities?
I mean for people that are not entering into treatment, and there is very little treatment out there anyway. People that are not voluntarily entering into treatment, that are continually committing crime and show that they're a danger to themselves and others, are apprehended and put into a facility.
You're talking involuntary treatment then?
Involuntary treatment.
Okay.
And that type of treatment does exist in our Mental Health Act.
Yes, it is controversial, though, as I'm sure you know, Randy. But thank you very much for that. And we're going to talk with an expert on crime in just a moment as well. But your thoughts, you talked earlier, Ian, about how this is not about just, catching people and a simplistic answer. So what do you see as a solution?
Well, Michelle, personal experience, I'm involved with a charity, nonprofit charity in downtown East Side called HAVE. And Culinary Institute, and it's a small little place, and we take people off the streets in downtown Vancouver, and we train them in culinary skills and get them jobs in restaurants. And we've been doing this for 15 years, and I think we've helped over 1,500 students. But there's clearly, your caller is right, clearly about one thing. There is, and for the sake of simplifying this, but sort of Team A and Team B. There's a lot of people downtown East Side that are capable, that just need to someone to wrap their arms around them and to make them feel worthwhile and to give them a skill and to help them get back into society. We see that all the time. The other side of this is the tragic side, where there are people on the streets that are very incapable of taking care of themselves, and it's very sad. And I'm not going to get into how we should solve that, but your caller is right. But I think the hope is that there's a lot of places that can embrace people living on the streets, help them get a skill, help them get a job. They are some of the most productive workers that our industry, the restaurant industry, see. They're very loyal and they're very, very capable, but we've just got to give them a chance. So there is a pathway out. And it's not, I want to make sure that all your listeners understand that, the areas that we see social problems, it's not everybody that doesn't have potential. In really, Michelle, most people do have potential. We just have to show them that. With
Ian,
some compassion.
Thank you very much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you, Michelle. All the best.
You too. Ian Tostenson is president and CEO of the BC Restaurant and Food Services Association, one of the 33 founding members of Save Our Streets. And we will continue to take your calls on the issue of public safety and crime. What is your perception and what is that based on? What do you think needs to change about how we deal with the complex issues related to crime? You can call us on the open line. That's coming up after this CBC News update. And here now is David Ball.
His granddaughter from Heiltsuk Nation. Here's the CBC News. A man and his granddaughter from Heiltsuk Nation on BC's Central Coast are asking BC's Police Complaints Commissioner to reopen discipline proceedings against 2 officers in Vancouver. This comes 4 years after the officers detained the 2 after they tried to open a Bank of Montreal account in Vancouver. The handcuffing led to a settlement and apology ceremony attended by a VPD leadership, but not the 2 arresting officers. Heiltsuk Chief Marilyn Slett says without the apology, there's no closure. The future of the park board is being called into question today. Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim intends to present a motion to City Council asking the province to amend the city charter that would give the city power to terminate the elected body. More than 100 people are registered to speak on the matter today. And UBC is launching a new research center to study ways society can coexist with wildfires as they become more intense and widespread with climate change. The new Centre for Wildfire Coexistence has been made possible by a $5 million donation. And now the BC weather. Snowfall warnings for the North Coast, Whistler, North Thompson, and West Kootenays. At least 15 centimeters of snow falling. For the North Coast, snowy and windy, the high of +5. For the Peace, sunny periods, winds to 60, high of 9. In the central interior, a chance of flurries or showers, the high to +4. For the Boundary and Kootenay region, snow and some sunny breaks, a high near freezing. In the Okanagan and southern interior, mainly cloudy, the high to +4. Here in Metro Vancouver, Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, cloudy, highs to 8. Tonight, rain, low of 5. And more local news in half an hour. Back to you, Michelle.
Nice to see you, David.
Thank you.
I know we have seen each other in the past and worked with each other during the evenings, so working on the late night newscast.
Yeah, I'm having a wonderful time filling in for Robert Zimmerman today, and he's showing me the ropes.
And it's daylight outside.
It's still daylight for maybe another hour, right?
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Welcome back here with BC Today here on CBC. We're on Radio 1, live streaming as well on CBC News. You can use the app there or CBC Gem. You can find us on YouTube as well. Just search for CBC Vancouver. And we are continuing our discussion into one of the big issues of 2023. That's public safety. And we just heard from Ian Tostenson, one of the members of a new group called Save Our Streets. In response to that group, Premier David Eby said he welcomes the work of a group to raise the profile of these issues and touted his government's push for federal changes to the bail process and approach to repeat violent offenders and BC's steps on mental health and addiction that he said was a driver on many of these issues. Now, that issue, crime and public safety, they often interconnect with the criminal justice system, with homelessness and substance use. And those issues have become even more heightened this past year. We're asking you for your thoughts as we wrap up the year. Has your perception of public safety in your community changed this year? What is that based on? And what do you think needs to change in how we address the complex issues around public safety? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can email to bctoday@cbc.ca. I have 2 guests for this conversation. Benjamin Perrin is a professor at the Allard School of Law at UBC and author of Indictment, the Criminal Justice System on Trial. He joins us by Zoom video. Good afternoon, Professor.
Hi, Michelle.
And Mario Canseco is president of the polling firm Research Co. He joins me here in studio. Hello to you, Mario.
Hi, Michelle. Great to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us. And Benjamin, I'll go to you first. I know in terms of this conversation, you have some apprehensions about the kinds of conversations we're having around public safety and asking about people's perceptions. Tell me about that.
Well, perception and reality can be 2 very, very different things. We know that crime has actually been increasing in Canada. We know that we have rising rates of homelessness. We have rising rates of unregulated drug deaths unabated, and people are impacted in different ways. What I found in my research, though, is unless we talk to folks who have been directly impacted by these issues, and read the research, we are going to get the wrong approach. The knee-jerk reaction to, for example, witnessing or seeing visible homelessness for many people is we need to get rid of decampments. Well, the research shows that's associated with people having a higher risk of dying. We see rising crime rates. Oh, we need more police. Again, the research shows that more police does not actually lower crime rates. We should lock people up for longer. You just mentioned the premier talking about having more people denied bail and spending time in pretrial custody. The research actually shows that our current systems of how we incarcerate people increases reoffending. So, it's all fine to talk about our perceptions, but we need to go past that and a deeper understanding to address some of the root causes. And it turns out that there are places around the world that are getting lower levels of crime and are doing it in a much more humane and innovative way than simply saying, let's hire 100 new police officers or lock more people up.
And so when you talk about bail reform, for example, what do you make of concerns that people who become, that small percentage that we hear about are becoming repeat offenders, and that contributes to a lack of safety?
That absolutely does. And when you hear about someone who, we have real cases of people who have spent 20, 30 different times in and out of custody, back out, committing offense, in and back out. That is the status quo, to be clear, Michelle. That is what the status quo does. It produces those outcomes. So in our research, we look at countries that break the cycles of violence. That's the key. We need a new transformative justice approach. We transform the harm and trauma rather than have it perpetuated. So we looked at countries like Norway, which had a similar system to Canada of incarcerating people, but they had a couple of prison riots. Some guards were tragically killed back in the late 80s, early 90s, and they decided to take a totally new approach. And they organized their new philosophy around one question. I think it's the same question we should ask. And it's, what kind of a neighbor do you want to have, right? What kind of a neighbor do you want to have? Because virtually everyone who's incarcerated is going to get out eventually. And in Norway, instead of doing what we do, which is locking people up and they come out much worse, they maybe join a gang, they get re-traumatized, they get their mental health and their substance use issues get worse and worse. Instead, Norway said, no, we're going to make the prison environment a safe place. It's going to look like a college campus. If you've seen the photos, you can go online and check for Halden Prison. It looks like the Apple campus. The rooms look like a dorm room. People get substance use support, they get counseling, they get vocational training, so that when they get out, they're integrated into community supports. And what happened is their reoffending rates went from kind of where ours are right now, 60 to 70% of people reoffending, that cycle going on. It went down to just 20% when they follow this more humane approach. So it saves money, it reduces crime, and it makes all of us safer.
On issues of public safety, Mario, you conducted a poll earlier this year. What did you find?
Well, we've been tracking this question since 2018, Michelle. Back then, we had 38% of BC residents who thought crime was rising. The last time we asked, it was 59%. Now, that same group, when we've been tracking these numbers for the past 6 years, they tell us the same number, roughly 1 out of 5, that they have reported something to the police. So perceptions are very different from reality when it comes to this issue.
So that the actual experience of it didn't change, but the perception had changed. What's behind that?
There's a couple of things. I mean, one of them is we're just coming off a municipal election where crime was front and center in most municipalities, lots of discussions about what to do. It's good retail politics because it's easy for candidates to say everything is wrong because those who are handling it are not doing it as well as I would. But we haven't really seen any changes over the past couple of the last 12 months when it comes to crime in specific areas, particularly Vancouver. So a lot of it is retail politics that is causing many residents to say, crime is rising. Are you experiencing it? No. Are your neighbors, in a bad situation? Not really, but everything around me tells me right now that the situation is getting worse.
Right. And yet we hear from businesses who say they have been experiencing more things like theft and break-ins, windows smashed at higher rates. And so where do they fit into this conversation?
Well, it's an important issue for them, of course. You don't want anybody losing money because of this. But ultimately, I think it's about the policies that you need to have in place to stop this from happening in the first place. One of the complexities that we saw, particularly in the last campaign, is all of those tweets with broken windows. This is the fault of the mayor, whoever it was at the time. We don't see those anymore because there's no political gain from it.
And so, Benjamin Perrin, you said, we need to be asking the right questions. Where do you hope this conversation goes then?
I think we need to start looking at why are we going to these old tired tools like saying more police will solve these social problems. They don't. I want to briefly go back to what the other guest said a minute ago about the politicization of this issue. People may have heard that while we were voting in our last municipal election, there was this huge fear of stranger attacks. Yet we now know, it only came out like a month or so ago, that stranger attacks had declined by 77% in the first half of 2021. So they had gone down, and the Vancouver Police Department have been heavily criticized for not publicly and more directly letting the public know that. So we were essentially voting in the dark. People voted out of fear for 100 new police officers. We're paying massive amounts of property tax hikes in Vancouver. Now, not every city has done this, okay? So Toronto and Chicago are examples of two cities, and this gets to your question as well. They had tough on crime candidates who said, oh, we're gonna solve these issues with more police. In Toronto, they wanted 500 new police officers, said one candidate, okay? Same thing in Chicago, but those candidates lost. Who ended up winning were candidates who said, look, issues like homelessness, substance use, mental health, these need tools that are housing, mental health support, substance use care, harm reduction. That's what will help people. And so what the city of Toronto has done is instead of investing in 100 new police officers, they now have they're rolling it out to the whole city in 2024, a fourth emergency response. So rather than it just be police, fire, and ambulance, they have a non-police crisis response team. Vancouver does not have this. We absolutely should have it. And I'll give you one example on the homelessness and business context. There's a outstanding investigation into a VPT officer who responded to a call of a homeless person sleeping outside a business up at Canby and 43rd. The complaint is from the business owner who called the police in the first place. The allegation is the VPT officer arrived and began kicking this homeless person, telling them they were entitled and that they would be sent to jail if they didn't move, okay? And the business owner has said how appalled and shocked they were at that cruel alleged response. Now imagine if we had a non-police response team. Instead of it being an armed, uniformed officer, if this were happening in regions of Toronto that have that support worker, it would be a support worker who would come, who in a much more gentle and humane way could help that person move along, get access to support and services. So we need to look differently and not just see policing and prisons as the tool or the fix, because they're really not to these complex social issues.
We're taking calls on this as well, asking people about your perceptions of public safety and what that is based on. And what do you think are what needs to change when it comes to our approach to those complex issues to get to the root causes that are interlinked with issues around crime and public safety? We're taking your calls. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. My guests are law professor and author Professor Benjamin Perrin at UBC and Mario Canseco in studio with me, president of Research Co. Dan has been waiting in Kelowna. Hi, Dan.
Hey, how's it going?
Well, thanks for waiting patiently. What are your thoughts on this? What is your sense, your perception of your community right now?
Well, I got a few thoughts on this. I worked in East Van with a social enterprise about 8 years ago. We worked with homeless people, taught them how to do construction. And one of the things that I learned very quickly was that unless we deal with the socioeconomic issues, just giving somebody a skill doesn't work. So I actually became a life coach because I would teach people how to do construction tasks. They'd show up to work the next day and be unable to perform the tasks I taught them the day before because they would go to such stressful environments, they weren't retaining anything, and they weren't actually getting ahead in life. We live in a country right now with record inflation, costs going up. I mean, I've got 4 kids. Our monthly expenses as a family have gone up by probably $2,800 in the last 18 months.
Okay.
And I'm a small business owner. I run a construction company still, constantly having stuff stolen, people like wandering onto our job sites, sleeping in them at night, causing all sorts of problems. And small businesses are really getting the brunt of this. I would say they're dealing with the brunt of this because it's typically small businesses that are getting vandalized. We do a lot of repairs. I get probably 2 calls a week from businesses that have had windows kicked in, doors smashed, vandalism, whatnot. And we are, we're dealing with that a lot. The government in September, they announced that they were going to extend the CERB to 2024. And then they quietly recanted that, and now it's due at the end of the year. And a lot of businesses are facing extreme price increases, labor shortages.
So
and
pressure from many fronts.
Yeah, and now we're going to get hit again by having to pay this CERB back when the government hasn't been able to really normalize things.
And Dan, you're talking about the impacts of the pandemic, and we heard that from Ian Tostenson as well. When it comes to the activities, the violence and theft that they've seen, what then do you think is a solution? You talked about needing to address socioeconomic issues.
Well, we definitely need housing. Sarah, I think 3 years ago when the Kelowna had that major crisis and a couple people froze to death, I actually was on with a group of people proposing tiny house villages. Kelowna has finally started to adopt that, which I think is great. But we really do need to address housing in this country. I think that honestly is the number one issue, not just for the homeless, but even for those that are, can't afford to buy. Having people that own a home across the board continues to show that people then invest and really take care of their communities. And we are destroying the ability to build actual communities by having such unaffordable housing.
Dan, good to hear from you. Thank you very much. Thanks for giving us a picture of what your life is like as a family person and business person as well. Lisa writes us, I live in Cook Street Village. Pre-COVID, I used to feel totally safe walking at the Ocean Walkway in the evening, walking home from a concert, etc. at 11 at night. I've been attacked by someone and threatened by people. There have been arson in our area and break-ins. People have built fences, floodlights, etc. It's a sad situation for everyone. Okay, I'm sorry for that, that you've been attacked, Lisa. Thank you for sharing that by email. I just have about a couple of minutes left here. Let's talk about what needs to be done. Housing was something that our caller just brought up. Is that part of that interconnection of solutions, Mario?
It's a huge issue, and we've seen it really climb the charts at the national level. I think that's the biggest difference that we've seen over the past year. It was a big issue in BC, to a lesser extent in some parts of Ontario. Now we have Atlantic Canada and Alberta joining the fray and saying housing is the number one issue facing the country. So it's going to be more important because it's the kind of thing where federal politicians can come here and say, talk to your premiers, talk to your mayors. Now it's a global issue, and it's definitely something that is more in the minds of many Canadians. It's not healthcare, it's not jobs, it's now housing.
And Benjamin, to you, how does housing fit in? Where do you want this to go in 2024?
I agree. Housing is a huge issue. We know from the research that housing first policies actually help lower costs in society, and they reduce criminal victimization. The fact is that people who are experiencing homelessness, who've been displaced, are themselves victimized by crime at horrific rates, right? We have young families, single people, folks are substantially more likely to experience violent crime if they don't have a safe place to live, not to mention their property, such as it is, being taken or stolen or damaged either by other folks or by bylaw officers or police. So housing first means we provide a house first, a safe place for someone to sleep at night before we ask them to change, right? That means that if you've got a substance use disorder, we don't say stop using before you get a house. The research shows that it's much more helpful. The other thing is providing permanent supportive housing with services. It's actually cheaper than providing shelter spaces, temporary shelter spaces where you have to come and go, and it's really not what many people need. So housing plays a absolutely huge role. But we are at a point where you try to put a supportive housing complex into a community, and you're very likely to have an uproar. So, what do we want? We don't want to see homeless people apparently, but then you try to give someone a house. We don't want that either. So,
how do you tackle that?
Yeah, I think this is where I just speak to people from the heart and say, most Canadians are actually, one paycheck away from not being able to afford where they live right now. And when we look at the homelessness counts in many Canadian cities, including here in Vancouver, where I am, the folks in our community who are there, we bear responsibility for them being homeless. A third of people who are homeless in the downtown east side in Vancouver broadly are Indigenous, and 2/3 of them are residential school survivors or the children or grandchildren of residential school survivors. So we also look at people who have a permanent brain injury who are homeless. I mean, people with mental health issues. We really have to start, and maybe this is the right season to talk about it. We need to start opening our hearts a bit to the idea that, we do need to take a softer approach to understand that. And what we're doing right now, I have to say, Michelle, I'm appalled at how the park rangers and Vancouver police, and we see it throughout the province in North America, are actively using their authority and power to shut down people's encampments, as they call them, and confiscate their goods. The research shows across 23 US cities where they've done this, it's associated with higher death rates. This policy isn't just displacing people from their homes, it's actually killing people. And it does so by destabilizing them and disconnecting them from support and services, higher rates of overdose deaths and such. So not only is what we're doing unhelpful, it's actually making things worse.
It's a conversation that will continue into the new year, I'm sure, and those concurrent issues, housing, substance use, and homelessness as well. I really appreciate your joining us for some perspective on this. Thank you.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Benjamin Perrin is a professor at the Allard School of Law at UBC, author of Indictment, the Criminal Justice System on Trial, and Mario Canseco is president of the polling firm Research Co. 12:52 now, 1:52 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC. Well, tributes have been pouring in for Emmy-winning actor Andre Braugher, who died yesterday at the age of 61. He was most known for playing Detective Frank Pemberton on the show Homicide, Life on the Street, and Captain Raymond Holt in the hit comedy Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Here's some of Braugher as the audience favorite, Captain Holt.
I'm tired of politics. Let's get that punk, Bloodsoe.
This is amazing. Of course, we have no idea where he is, but I love where your head's at.
He has no family. Maybe there was a girlfriend or someone he worked with at the coffee shop.
The coffee shop. Why would someone who knows they have $21 million coming take a minimum wage job?
Because he needed access to that building.
Because that's where the money's hidden. All right, we gotta get there quick.
Maybe we should take the chopper.
Here's that chopper.
Deathblade, Sidewinder, it's go time.
Roger that, wet blanket.
No, from now on, call me Velvet Thunder.
Okay.
Joining me now is Rachel Ho, a film critic and editor at Exclaim magazine. Nice to speak with you again, Rachel.
Hi, Michelle. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I've been seeing all the comments from his co-stars, from audiences as well, who just loved him in that character, but also throughout his career. What have people been saying?
It's all been quite a shock, really. I mean, he was only 61 years old, and it seems like this illness that we don't have very much information on. And of course, we don't need that much information on it, but it seems to have come on fairly quickly and very unexpectedly. So for a lot of people, it's very surprising, but obviously it's an outpouring of love and respect towards this man who brought a lot of joy and a lot of entertainment to so many people around the world.
What stands out to you when it comes to his roles and his acting career?
I mean, he has the two big performances. Both happen to be police related. You know, he played Detective Frank Pemberton in Homicide, and that was back in the 90s, or sorry, rather in the early, in the 90s. And then, of course, Captain Raymond Holt that we just heard there on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. But under both of them, you know, he was always this kind of Shakespearean actor. He had such a way with his voice, such a way of using his voice as such a main tool. But and it was such a joy to see that getting turned into a comedic route later in his career, which I think we all really enjoyed those, and I know the internet enjoyed them.
The internet enjoyed it. I enjoyed him in that role. Certainly, he was my favorite. Just that gravitas that he brought to it, and this seemingly, hardened outer shell, but a real soft heart inside. What did that role mean to him?
You know, I was looking back at some of his interviews, and so he did start out in drama. You know, he started out as a dramatic actor, and at one point he does say, back in, I think it's the late 90s, early 2000s, he says, you know, maybe one day I'll move into something a bit lighter, but I enjoy doing the dramatic roles now. And then him moving into comedy, he said about that was he just wanted to try something new. He wanted to learn a new skill. And that's something that impresses me about an actor who was already quite accomplished and quite achieved in his career, was that he was always trying to learn. He was always trying to get better. So coming on with people like, you know, Chelsea and Andy
Chelsea
Samberg, of
Peretti,
course,
yeah.
Terry Crew. Yeah, it's, you know, these great comedic actors. And he said, you know, he took so much from them. And he talks about, it's kind of funny considering what a great actor he is. He talks about being a bit hesitant in terms of the improv side of things. How he didn't think he was good enough to do that. He thought, oh, I'll just say the words as is. They can improv around me. But it seems like he picked up so much from all of those actors and all of those shows. And of course, you know, and as also a show called Men of a Certain Age, which was the first real comedic thing that he did, which was with Ray Romano and Scott Bakula. So I think he really did relish joining that comedic world a lot more and later in his career.
Wow. And really, I mean, he just crossed over so easily, but he brought that heft with him, right? And it gave it a different tinge. Watching him do comedy, you knew the way he delivered a speech. Okay, this person has done Shakespeare.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what makes it so funny, really, was like someone so serious, like you said, such a hard shell, someone so serious and someone that you think is very straightforward. And that, you know, even the clip that you guys just played where he, you know, says he's going to be called Velvet Thunder, you know, the way that he delivers that line,
Yeah.
it really is as if he's on the stage in the West End or on Broadway or
That's
something,
right.
not in a sitcom, you know, so.
I have about 30 seconds, but what impact do you think he'll have on the acting world?
I think a massive impact. You know, he's one of those actors that maybe never became quite the household name, but he was always someone who was very well respected amongst his peers. And again, like I said, someone who that fans, people who liked watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine, who liked watching Homicide, Men of a Certain Age.
Yeah.
We all took so much from him and so much joy from him. And I think that's his legacy at the end of the day, which is, I assume, what all actors are looking for.
Yeah, I know a lot of tributes today. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah. Thank you. Take care, Michelle.
You too. Rachel Ho is a writer with Exclaim magazine. This is BC Today. Thanks for joining us. And that's it for our show today. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning into the program. Thanks everyone as well who called in to the show today. You can always email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. You can listen again on the CBC Listen app or watch us again on YouTube. Just search CBC Vancouver. I'm Michelle Eliot. Have a great afternoon. We'll be back tomorrow.